Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley and the host of SuperPsyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. SuperPsyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. Dreams are fascinating things. Whether we know it or not, we all dream approximately 6 times per night. We may remember our dreams and even think about them all day, or we may forget them entirely. For years, and in many cultures, dreams have held deep meanings. These days, some people continue to mine dreams for their meaning, and I have seen them have tremendous usefulness as a therapist and in my own life. Dr. James Hollis is a psychologist and a Jungian analyst. He was educated at the Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland, and has written 14 books. I have read several of his books and consider him one of the most important voices in psychology. Jim regularly interprets dreams of his patients, and he's spent a great deal of time interpreting his own. This is Jim's second time visiting me on SuperPsyched, and I'm so happy to have him back. As you'll hear, he's a thoughtful and relatable person. You'll also hear him interpret one of my own dreams. So listen in as Jim and I talk about dream interpretation. Dr. James Hollis, who has asked me to call him Jim, a hearty welcome back to SuperPsyched.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, Adam.
Jim, I know that you probably are not a big fan of hearing such things, but I have to do it anyway. Last night, I reported to my wife, Jim's words could be and should be written in stone. They are so good, so timeless. I remember the very first time I was listening to you. I was listening to the middle passage out on a walk, not really knowing who James Hollis was at the time, because I have not been in the Jungian circle. And it was as if your words were mainlined right to my head and heart. Like I felt so connected with that book. And that was my gateway drug to your world. So I want to thank you for that and your other contributions today. I can't believe we get to talk about dream interpretations, a long history for dream interpretation, thousands of years, and several different ideas of what dreams are, what they represent. You've told me that whether we know we have 6 dreams per night and spend 6 years of our lives dreaming. I think about just the mystique around dreams. Joseph in Egypt back in the day, interpreting dreams for the
Pharaoh.
And the Chinese in the 16th century wrote books about it. So let's talk about why is it important for us to consider dreams as a part of a factor that might weigh in on our mental health or our well-being or whatever you might see. What's the importance of dreams within our lives?
Well, let's go back to the basics. The real question is, what is running our lives? If from time to time, the folks watching have had to scratch their head and say, what was I thinking when I made that decision and chose that person or that career or whatever? And the problem with the unconscious, as you recall, are discussing, is that it's unconscious, so we don't know. So if you'll bear with me, I want to zero in on dreams, but we'll have to get there first. We have various venues in which the autonomy of the human psyche is at work. We think we're the boss, but from time to time, we have to wonder, why is this coming from me? Or we have to sooner or later recognize the only person present in that long-running drama is me, so I somehow have to be accountable, although we know some folks that are continuously running from that kind of accountability and blaming others. But underneath all of this, there are elemental systems running our life so that we take for granted the cellular process, the digestive process, all of these sorts of things. But just to be short in my definition, first of all, we have the feeling function that we think we create, but these are autonomous. Again, if you do all the right things as your family wanted it or your culture wanted it, you're supposed to be happy, right? You're supposed to fit in. You're supposed to be now acceptable. You're supposed to be prized by others, but the feelings don't cooperate. Why is it so flat inside? Why am I depressed? Why is it that the payoff is not there? We have energy systems that are autonomous. We can mobilize energy to step out of the way of a car or change the baby's diaper at 4 a.m. That's important in life and survival. But if you keep pushing your energy systems up against the wrong values or the wrong agenda, sooner or later they'll betray you. You'll wind up with boredom, ultimately depression, and so forth. We have dreams, which we're going to talk about, these autonomous reactions of our own psyche. Most of all is the question of meaning. If what we're doing is meaningful, it allows us to get through anything. If it's not meaningful, we burn out quickly. As Jung put it very succinctly, the smallest of things with meaning is always larger than the largest of things without meaning. And meaning is not something that the ego decides. The culture tells you, your family tells you, this is what you need to do or be to have a meaningful life. Well, go ahead and do it. Try it on. See what happens to you. What does it feel like inside? So meaning is unique to each of us. What is right for person A is not right for person B. And then there's psychopathology. That word psychopathology, if we just take apart the pieces from the Greek, the expression of the suffering of the soul. Someone might say, oh, I have a soul? What are you talking about now? Well, the soul is the literal translation of the Greek word psyche. Ironically, it's about whatever is deeply purposeful within you. It's growing your toenails at this moment. It's digesting your food. It's mentating. It's emoting. It's doing all these projects and all of these functions. And at the same time, it has its own agenda. And I think there are two elements to that agenda. First of all is self-healing. When we're injured, there's something in there that begins to compensate and support, and whether it's a broken bone or a broken heart. And secondly, it's seeking its expression in the world. And maybe the circumstances of our time and place are not conducive to supporting that, or whatever values or messages we picked up from our family or cultural experiences, religion and education and so forth. All of these things are either supportive or they're not. And if you're lucky to have an environment that's supportive of your own independence, your growth, and your development, you're halfway there, because then you can begin to trust your own resources. If you're not, you're always going to feel outvoted. And therefore, the psyche is going to pathologize. That is to say, expressing its suffering autonomously. So, it's the oldest of cliches, I know, but it's a cliche because it's repeatedly true. Things don't pathologize if you're in right relationship to your own soul. If you're following values, however well-intended, because as parents, we always try to do the best for our children, but they have their separate journeys. You had to separate in order to find your path. How do we facilitate that in our children? That's partly by withdrawing our projections upon them and our agendas for them and so forth, however well-meaning we wish to be. And then you begin to realize, there's an autonomous other inside of each of us. Putting it in blunt terms, there's something inside of you that knows you better than you know yourself. And when you are in touch with that and guided by that, something feels right inside. Life supports you from within. If you don't have that connection, no matter what you achieve in the outer world, it's going to be violating something profound within you. You climb to the top of the mountain or the career success, and you realize there's no there. It was someone else's agenda. So then we begin to recognize that our symptoms, rather than being suppressed, we have to ask, why have they come? What are they asking of us? In what way am I allied against my own nature here? Whether my environment supports me or not, a lot of this comes down to whether the choices we make are coming from some deep place within us or are simply reactive to the circumstances around us. Now, we knew that as children intuitively, and it was called instinct. But again, we're tiny, powerless, defenseless in the world. And therefore, we set off with the best of intentions, with all the messages we get. And no wonder we wind up as strangers to ourselves. So rather than suppress the symptom, we ask, why has it come? What corrective is it asking of me? I think I may have mentioned my own illustration. At midlife, I'd achieved everything I was supposed to achieve. And I was hit with a serious depression. And that was an affront to the ego. It thought it was managing things pretty well. It was building a career, creating family, all these sorts of expected things, all good. And yet something inside was in revolt. And it sent me to my first hour of therapy. And that's a humbling experience. And most of our psychologies, frankly, are sort of invested in the fantasy. Well, if I can figure this out, then I'll be more in charge of my life. There's a certain kind of ego inflation there that thinks, well, I really am the boss, and I just get a little tune up here and it'll flow much better here.
Right.
Well, again, that's not quite the way it works. It's rather, what do I need to learn here? This takes us back to the drawing board, just when maybe we figured out what we think is valuable in this life and where to make our choices. So I often ask of clients, let's try to examine where that choice came from inside of you. What was that in service to? Maybe at the time, because we're doing our best, we make the best choices we can. And at the time, we don't realize that a certain choice is based on codependence. It's based on an old fear-based response, or it's trying to fit in or get somebody's approval. Those are not federal crimes, but they just deepen the split within each of us. And whatever the symptomatology is, it doesn't go away, it gets stronger. So then we're sort of sooner or later dragged kicking and screaming back to say, what's going on here? What do I need to learn about my life? And that's why I say this is humbling work, not inflationary work. You don't get more in control. You just learn that you have to pay more attention to what's going on. And that's what the word therapy means from the Greek. It's to listen or attend to the voice of the soul, is what it means from the Greek. And then you begin to realize that one of the primary avenues for that conversation is working with dreams. As you said, we dream every night. And of course, the average person never remembers those dreams or remembers very few of them. And then you have to say, well, part of this is because we're so busy. We're always distracted by the loudest noise outside of us. You have to stay there and pay attention and say, now, what was I just seeing, or whom was I talking to? I mean, I myself will wake up and think I was just talking to Abraham Lincoln or something like that. And you think, oh, that was a dream. That was a dream. I have to try to grab hold of it because it slips away very quickly. Because the dream seems to come from that part of the brain that's more primitive, and it's distanced from the frontal cortex where we have memory and so forth. So they slip away quickly. So you have to try to catch them while you can. So everybody should have a notebook there to try to write them down in. I actually have a pen here, but it lights up and I try to write down the dreams. So then you begin to realize something inside is trying to communicate to me. Now, there's an old German proverb that says, Träume sind Schäume. Dreams are froth. They're just detritus of daily life. And it's true that there is a place where it's processing the distresses of daily life. That's true. In laboratory settings, when people have been deprived of dreaming, not sleeping, but dreaming over several days, they tend to hallucinate. So it is as if that material, not processed, has to then go externally as a projection of that material onto the environment in some way, which is itself extraordinary. Now, what is the dream trying to do? And as you rightly said, there have been many theories. I happen to think, and some of this is my view of having worked with dreams for over 4 decades, and some of it's theory from the field. There are what I'll call reactive dreams or processing dreams. But it's too easy for the ego to say, oh, I know what that's about. That happened at work yesterday, or my wife and I had an argument, or the children did this or that. The dream doesn't have to waste energy on telling you what you already know. You already are conscious of that. To say that caused this doesn't tell you anything. You rather have to ask the question, but why did the psyche maybe choose that arena or choose that image or that issue that may have been triggered externally? Why did it dwell on that and bring it to my attention? Then you realize it's not about what it's about often. And then you have to ask the question, so what is it about? An example, I had a dream from a client a number of years ago, and we really worked hard to try to get what this dream was about. Some child she'd known in grade school, hadn't seen for decades. And as she's walking out, suddenly she's flashing a memory that yesterday she had a humiliating experience at her employment. And that was linked to an experience back there in grade school, which she had forgotten consciously. But nothing is lost in the psyche. It's there somewhere to be triggered later. So we have, first of all, the reactive dream. And if you're dreaming about something that seems obvious, then it's saying, hey, fella or lady, you haven't really understood what that's really about. We don't waste time here. Nature doesn't waste energy. Pay more attention to it. Maybe it's not about what it's about, but it's saying there's an analogy here to something else going on in your life. Secondly, there are dreams, and this is very important for therapy, compensatory dreams. That is to say, in life, we become one-sided. You're rewarded for being one-sided. You go to work and you work for whatever you're doing, and it's taking you away from other parts of your nature. And so those other parts of one's own natural life are not going away. They will express their protest, and they often will come up as compensatory dreams, saying you forgot something over here. Here, we're sort of weighing in on this. I remember years ago in New Jersey, there was a wonderful state billboard campaign put out by the Dental Association that said, ignore your teeth and they'll go away. And I thought that was a great one.
That's really...
Ignore the issue and it'll go away. No, it won't. It'll go underground and come out in some other place. So your psyche is always trying to bring you back online as seen from the perspective of the psyche, not from the perspective of your culture. Those kinds of dreams are very important in therapy because they can give us a clue to what that one-sidedness is or what other value may be coming up. We'll say if a child learned early on, if I expressed my feelings strongly, if I'm angry, for example, it makes things worse. I get punished for that, let's say. Well, then what happens to that real injury, the reaction to which has been pushed underground? Well, again, it will show up as anger turned inwards, which is depression, learned helplessness. It'll show up in some act within the dream. You know, as Freud said once, they deny my theories by day and dream them at night. So they don't go away. In other words, they go somewhere. Thirdly, there are archetypal dreams. That is to say, dreams that really tap into the universal symbol-making function that we carry as humans. Literally, you or I could have a dream tonight that was essentially the same as someone dreaming 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. And what's in common is the sense of the elemental human way that we impose on the chaos of nature. These patterning processes, Jung called them archetypes, which are primal patterns, basically. An archetype is not a noun. It doesn't show up on MRI. It's a verb. It's a structuring process that creates images that you can find in the great mythologies and religions and ritual traditions of cultures everywhere, or the dreams of ancients, and you will have those same dreams. And then fourthly, and this is the rarest of all, but they've been reported from the beginnings of recorded history, are dreams that are prophetic in nature. And we have no idea how they occur, where it's clear that the psyche rarely, but it does troll what's going on in the person's time and place. And people have sometimes accurately had dreams. I could give you some of those examples, but they are rare. First one I ever got, I took to supervision when I was in training in Zurich. And my analyst said, all we can do is respect the mystery. We don't know, except it's picking up some intuitive formulation of something that's in the collective out there somehow that this person has tapped into. Again, they're rare, but they've been reported throughout history. So those are sort of the four categories of dreams. I'm sorry if I keep babbling, but I put a lot of stuff out here.
Riveting.
Well, then when we look at dreams, we look first at the objective level. That is to say, maybe this dream is commenting on what I'm experiencing at work. It's not so much about the work, but how what's happening there is having an impact on my psychological well-being. And therefore, I need to pay attention to that. It gets tricky when, say, you dream of your partner in a dream or your child. Is this really telling me something about the relationship, which I need to know about? Or is that the psyche's dream maker using my child, let's say, to refer to something intrapsychic, which is to move to the subjective level of the dream, its interiority, which is just as real? And it can be both, of course. give you a quick example, a humorous one. It does not reflect well on me as a parent. But when my last child went off to college, I gave the usual talk of the loving, all-knowing parent. And I said, look, college is like a smorgasbord. You're going to want to take everything. And you'll get overrun. It's just too much. And secondly, of course, there's no parent there to say, have you done your homework? It's all on you. And you're going to have to be accountable for getting your papers done on time and preparing for things, et cetera, et cetera. And both children appropriately said, yes, Dad, thank you very much. Thank you. Ta-ta. So in the dream, my son had gone and registered for 5 classes. And then he said, oh yeah, I signed up for Russian too. And I'm thinking, oh no, it's too much. It's for a first-term freshman, he doesn't know what he's running into. And so that was my little speech to him. He said, yes, Dad, thank you. Next morning, I wake with a dream. I'm driving my children to college. That in itself is not surprising. The problem is I look in the back seat and they're in their baby seats, but they're there as adults. So I slapped my head and I said, my own psyche is critiquing my attitude that I was after all a college professor in my misbegotten days. And I think I know everything about this, but I don't know what's right from them. They're going to have to find out for themselves. Here you are trying to drive their car, so to speak, although it was my vehicle, and thinking of them still as children when they're adults. They'll have to learn. And sure enough, in a few weeks, my son emails me. Actually, it was before email, it was a call. He said, well, Russian was too much, so I dropped it. It's like, well, yeah, now you know. So you see, in that case, the dream was both, because it was critiquing my relationship in the outer world to them, but it was also critiquing my attitude toward them. And it taught me a lot about shut up. They're going to find their way. That's how they learn. That's how I learned. You have to make mistakes and so forth. So with dreams, we look at the various constitutive elements to it. There's a person and place and plot and time and so forth. And too often when we try to approach our dreams, we put the emphasis strictly on the plot. Let's watch the mystery on the TV here and figure out who done it or what this is about. And that is important, but there are times it may not be about that. I had a client, for example, who in his 40s was very much stuck in some strong family of origin complexes. And I swear at least 50% of his dreams had placed him back at his parents' home or on the street where they once lived. And it was saying, you haven't yet left home psychologically. You're living an outwardly productive life, but parts of you haven't really left home and what that means to you and that's a different kind of agenda than you would have expected. So you can see it's not easy work. It's not a science. There are brain studies and there are sleep research projects that are scientific in their orientation, but it's more intuitive in the same way in which you would approach trying to work at, say, the creative process within an individual, because it is a profound creative process within us. Jung was asked once, are dreams trying to deceive us because they are often so elusive? And he said, well, nature doesn't deceive. He said, we have lost linkage to the symbolic world. We deal with tangible realities out here too much. And our ancestors understood the symbolic world was also the real world. The symbolic world is just as real as tomorrow's headlines, because that's where the real drama of our life is occurring. And we all need to learn that. And that may be humbling to the ego. It tells you the ego, you're not quite as smart as you think you are. And you're not really the boss here. However, we're trying to initiate a reciprocal relationship here. The more the conversation within occurs, the more likely I'm going to be making better choices in the world out there. So let me stop for a moment. Just say I'm starting to babble here a little bit.
So Jim, I just want you to see how many notes I've taken based on this. I think this is a super psyched first in terms of the number of notes I had to take, because there were so many compelling pieces, and I'm just going to attend to a few of them. But I love the idea that nature doesn't lie and that nature does not waste energy, and that whether it's reflecting on Jung's quote, which I'm going to paraphrase poorly, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will drive us and we will think it was fate. Or the Gospel of Thomas quote that you put at the beginning of the middle path, if we bring forth that which is within us, it will save us. If we do not bring forth that which is within us, it will destroy us. And I'm thinking about whether it's dentistry, and you brought up your quote about forgetting about your teeth and they will go away. One of my dentists very wisely said, only floss the teeth you wish to keep. And so I think about in terms of dreams. I also think about no one would think twice about getting an X-ray, an MRI, or some type of imaging if it was needed. And yet we kind of look askance at the idea, the frothy idea from the German quote of dreams. Like, what value could they possibly have? Those are just noise, except for the fact that they are not. And you broke out 4 basic categories. And I'm thinking of that dream that you had with your son as in many ways a wishful dream. Like, I wish he were still able, like there's a sadness, the countertransferential experience of parent when child begins to individuate. But there's something so hard about that. To this day, I see my older son, who's just a beast of a human, and whether it's physically or cognitively, he's incredible. And I still call him my little baby. There's an unconscious wish there. And it's kind of silly. Unfortunately, it's not causing him to regress. Let's get into a dream I had. Let's mess with it. I had it last night and it was perplexing. I'm in Japan, but I know I used to live in Japan. I'm actually in some version of California, and I left my car somewhere, a car I was borrowing, and was not totally in love with that car. And I cannot find my car. I'm at a parking garage where it might be, but I already looked on various floors in the garage for the car, but I just couldn't find that car. And I meet some young Japanese thugs who said they would do something harmful physically to me unless I paid them. I decided to look for my car elsewhere, but the car I was borrowing didn't have the type of technology that would allow me to find it through my smartphone or anything else. And in my dream, I felt a bit exhausted and desperate.
Okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, I think this is very serious, Adam. I didn't realize that things were so precarious for you, right? I'm joking when I say
No, they are a little bit. There's a lot going on in the psyche at the moment. It's very fertile.
Everything depends on your personal associations. Let's just say for a moment, you dream about your son or you dream about your grandmother. And I do the same thing. Your grandmother is not my grandmother. Your son is not my son. Dream dictionaries out there are pretty worthless. Usually they're written by well-meaning people who want to say this image equals this. All right. So once you get that, it's a foreign language, and this will help you translate the language. On Google, you can translate into any language you want to say, how do I buy that automobile, let's say. But dreams don't work that. They use symbols. Symbols are images that point beyond themselves towards something that's not particularly explicable or not fully conscious. And therefore, there's an intimation of a bridge. They're metaphors. And the word metaphor means to carry over, carry across. So it's like that image. We'll take the car, for example. What is a car? Well, it's your current means of going forward. It's your directed conscious activity. It takes you from here to there. You get on, you perform certain acts, and it takes you there. What? For reasons I don't know, and you should beware of starting a dream in a public forum like this because you don't know where this will take you. But I would say in general, not speaking about the dream of Adam per se, when you've lost your car, it's kind of like losing your purse. These are modalities that are unique to you, necessary seemingly for you, and you've lost contact with something that is fundamental in your life. So I would say in a generic sense, there's some blockage at this moment. The fact that it's set in Japan, unless you grew up in Japan, which would
spent 3 years there working,
associations and so forth, you'd have to say losing my initiative and forward motion in this area is not unlike being adrift in someone else's culture. When I'm there and not having my full resources available to me, the ones I usually depend upon, it's going to feel dangerous for me. It's going to not only be foreign, but in some way dangerous. And so there, I'm under some kind of threat. So I would say that one would start looking at, well, where are you feeling stuck in your life? Where are you feeling blocked in some forward motion? Or your previous attitudes, behaviors, strategies maybe are not applicable to the situation in your life at this moment. It could be a very general statement about an invitation to the next stage of one's growth and development, or it could be tied to something specific, a choice you need to make, or an issue that one could put off for a while, but its imminence is now undeniable. So you see, then you take it back into the world of the dreamer, and it depends on what begins to emerge from the dreamer's conversation. Jung himself used to say often by his report, I have no idea what this dream means, but together we'll talk this through and we'll put it in our hands and wrestle with it. And in time, its meaning will come to us, you see. So it's an exploratory and intuitive function rather than this equals this kind of thing. I'll give you a quick example. A woman who grew up in Berlin and had lived under the influence of a very positive, benevolent father, but she had never had her own personal initiative. She was a good girl. I saw her at age 65, or her age 65, when she had lost her husband. And when her father died, she married a man older. When he died, she came to therapy. And our first work was appropriately grief work for her. I kept asking her to work with her dreams, and she's just said over and over, I have no dreams. Finally, one day, she came in and she had a dream, and she was angry at the dream. And I thought, well, at this moment, we're moving from supportive psychotherapy, which was appropriate, to analysis for the first time, which means analysis coming from the Greek word meaning to stir up from below. Here's her dream. I'll call him Joe, wasn't his name at all, but I and Joe are some kind of pilgrimage, and we're going through a beautiful garden together. She'd have a happy marriage. And we reach a fast-flowing stream and a bridge across that stream. And I suddenly realized I've forgotten my purse. Joe goes on ahead, so I've got to go back to the car, fetch my purse, and catch up with him. So she goes back in the dream to the car, gets her purse, comes back to the same place, this arching bridge. And as she stands and starts to cross the bridge, an unknown man from her left joins her. And he's at the same time a stranger and yet familiar to her, as if she's known him, but she doesn't know who he is. They cross the bridge, and this very private person suddenly starts telling him her whole life story. It must have been a long bridge, but she reaches the end of it and then brings him up to date and says, my husband just passed away, and I'm so alone, and I'm so alone. And he commiserates, and he says, I know, but it's been good for me, according to himself. And she realizes as she crosses the bridge, I'm just trying to catch up with Joe, but he's also dead. And then she's offended by this man's seeming insensitivity. And the dream was so alive for her, she was angry, as if someone had accosted her on the street below with rudeness and saying, well, your suffering's good for me, right? But again, I felt this is the first time she begins to realize she's detaching that external direction that had come from both well-intended father and well-intended husband. And that has meant her own personal authority, personal direction, personal link to her inner life is now up for grabs. In fact, she, as you might well expect, tried to transfer that to me, even though at the time I was younger than she was. She's now long deceased. But she was being forced to address that question of inner authority. See, what's in a purse? Your identity, your personal effects, your resources, your keys. It's a bag for holding metaphors. And it was not unlike your dream here of losing your car.
Exactly.
Something is blocking the forward motion. We don't know what it is, but it's helpful to know that the psyche inside is responding and saying, all right, let's pay attention to this, because consciousness now is tasked with addressing, well, what do I need to do to address something here? Some blockage, whether it's outer or inner, I need to take that seriously. And over time, you begin to have that kind of conversation. It actually gives one a deepened sense of personal authority. In other words, if it's true, and I truly believe it is, something inside of us knows us better than knows ourselves and has its purposes in mind. And its purposes are not necessarily to help us fit in and be successful in this world. If you're well adjusted to a crazy world, what does that make you? So the people that you would admire most in history are people who were seldom popular. They're people who often suffered greatly, but what we admire about them is that they honored something within themselves that was seeking expression in the world through them. It's not about my feeling good about myself. It's not about fitting in. It's about serving something worthy of service. And if I don't do that, I'm serving something that's not worthy of my service. We're here a short time. You better be sure that what you're serving is really life-enhancing, that comes out of your depth, brings you depth, dignity, and purpose in life. If making money did it, we'd know.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of miserable, affluent people. If having power worked, we would know it. But the most powerful are also the most desolate and miserable people, as we know. If finding someone to take care of you did it, then you would be fine, but you'd be stuck as a child. So the summons of the psyche is to grow up, be responsible, and find the courage and the wherewithal to be humbled by this conversation, but also be strengthened by it. Because sooner or later, if you really need to know what's the right choice in your life, your psyche is going to tell you, and it'll tell you through a dream, or you awake at 3 a.m, you have clarity. Or sometimes I've had insights driving on a highway. I think it's because my conscious intention's over here on the traffic. It allows the repressed material to come up from the other side, and suddenly I realize I'm thinking about something else. I don't advise this for driving the Interstate 5 necessarily, but it works that way, that the psyche is always speaking. The question is, are we ever listening?
And it, to your point, it knows us better than we know ourselves, which may in part be a component of why we're stronger when we're living in our truth. And this woman who had this dream, I'm going to take a massive swing, and I'm probably going to be wrong, but it sounded like the man who saw her saying, well, it's been good for me.
That's right.
What I got was, it was her animus saying, hey, guess what?
Yes. I was trying to avoid that word, yes.
Okay, sorry.
That's correct. It's what Jung called the animus, which is the inner voice of authority for a woman. It's that part of her that allows her or supports her in taking who she is into the real world. And she didn't know it, but she'd grown up in a Germanic culture where the father was God, so to speak. And he was a benevolent person. And she used to even bring her dates home for father's approval, and none of them seemed to measure up. Surprise, surprise. And she didn't marry till her 40s. Nothing wrong with that per se. It's just that she was still under the influence of that parental presence. A good example, when Jung visited, it was either Uganda or Kenya in the 20s. He went to both countries. I was asking some of them about dreams, and one of the person said, well, we don't have to dream anymore. The DC has come. And the DC was the district commissioner that was granted by the colonial authorities. In other words, we know who the authority is now. Historically, the tribe trusted their dreams. And when they had a little dream, so to speak, that was a personal dream. And that's for you. But then there were times when you have the big dream. That's what Jung would call the archetypal dream. Your responsibility was to share that with the tribal elders, because the gods, so to speak, have chosen this person to be the vehicle for a message to the tribe and so forth. But this person was saying, I don't have to dream anymore because the district commissioner takes care of all that. So in her own well-meaning way, she had never found personal authority. That's the key. And that's the central task of the second half of life, is the recovery of personal authority. That is to say, from the bombardment of voices we have externally addressing us every day, or from the acquired complexes with all their noisy chatter inside. What voice is the voice of the soul? And that's a discernment process over time. And you have to pay attention to that conversation, or you're obeying some other false prophet, so to speak. And the man who was familiar, because he's always been a part of her, but still unknown to her, was the animus. And he was saying think of the wisdom of this. From the conscious standpoint, naturally, she would love to have her husband back. That would have solved this problem. That's just not in the cards. She tried to transfer, and I'm making her sound utterly dependent. She was a very gifted scientist, happened to be in the same field as her father, by the way, no surprise. She was the perfect daughter, so to speak, as her father, and she understood that. But she didn't really have to think for herself and live her journey until fate, removing her husband, forced her into this position. And she tried to transfer that authority to me. And I said, that's not my role here. She actually used the word guru. She said, I want you to become my guru. And respectfully, I said, the guru is within you. And I don't think she grasped that until that dream. And that was the beginning of a transformation.
And the dream actually woke her up to that reality.
Well,
I'm remembering, this is going to sound like a funny thing for me to bring up. In the 80s, I watched the movie La Bamba about Ricky Valens' life. And there's a scene where he's in Mexico with a curandera, a Mexican healer. And she said something akin to, when we are awake, we are sleeping. And when we are sleeping, we are awake. And everything you've been saying so far, because we have so many red herrings, so many distractors, so many aspects of our external and internal lives that deceive us. But when we sleep and we're dreaming, the truth appears to come unvarnished, except it's mysterious.
That's right. It again speaks symbolic language. Now, your viewers here could say, quite honestly, this is the biggest pile of nonsense I ever heard. And there are days I think that, except then a dream with a client or my own will call me back to, this is incredible. There is a pipeline. I don't want to suggest it's like a telex that tells you buy that relationship, sell that career, or whatever. It's something quite different than that. Again, it's something you need to sit with and allow it to percolate through the layers of your psyche until it reaches something here. Specific example, I was in Zurich for training for 6 years. Toward the end of the 4th year that I walked out of my analytic hour, and I had another dream telling me the same thing that had to do with an important choice in life. It had been saying the same thing. And I said to myself something like, holy cow, or words to that effect, he's been telling me all the while. And at that moment, it moved from a thought of the brain, which was obviously pretty dedicated to this work, if I'd already spent 4 years at it. But it moved at that point to a felt thing of the heart. At that point, I knew. That's what Jung calls the self with a capital S, das Selbst in German, not to be confused with the ego. The ego is this thin cluster of conscious life that expands in a moment and then it contracts and it's easily invaded by intrapsychic material or response to the outer world. And again, it's necessary because it's that part of us that says, well, look both ways for you across the street, or pay your taxes on time. Whatever the ego's executive function is, it's to carry out our adaptation of the outer world. The problem is when it arrogates to itself powers it doesn't have, like, I'm the boss here, I know who I am, I'm making proper choices. Quick example, many years ago, I was in Houston. I was invited to be a guest teacher at a 3-hour seminar for advanced students who were studying the entire semester love and relationships. Great subject. So the first 90 minutes, we talked about the intrapsychic images, projecting them onto others, transference, countertransference, the dynamics that go on in between. They were bright students, they got it. Then we took a break, came back, and I said, now we're going to apply all of that theory to your current relationships or the ones that just ended for you. And it was like the curtain came down. They were absolutely inarticulate. And then I remember thinking, this is one reason I left college teaching. When you're 19 or 20, you can't bear to look at this that way. You've got to have the delusion you know what you're doing, or you'd never leave home. You've got to think that you're figuring it out. But to realize that whether you like it or not, as much as a cliche as it seems, your mother and father are very much part of the projection onto this person, the beloved other you've just, seen here, the Beshert, I don't want to look at that. I'm a big person now. I can drive a car, I can smoke, I can drink, I can do whatever. Well, no, you're not. The intrapsychic images are going to be profoundly influenced by your earliest formative experiences of parent and child. And so you're either trying to repeat that, which is very common, or you're trying to get away from that. I'll be anybody except my parents. Or thirdly, you have a kind of unconscious treatment plan, which is like staying busy, staying stoned. Just avoid this dialogue. The ego isn't strong enough at that point, with the rarest of exceptions, to take on these things. Well, I'll see you when you're 40. By then, your marriage will be in trouble. Your beautiful, delightful children don't want to talk to you. You're experiencing a depression and too much self-medication. Then we'll have a conversation, because then you'll be able to say, I don't have a clue what went wrong. I did all the right things. And he would say, well, it was back there in that class we were talking about. So that's why this work is humbling. As I've said, it's not going to just make you feel good all the time. It's going to say, well, Buster, pay attention. There are things here going on you don't even know about. But don't discount what's going on inside. Don't discount the history that's alive and active within you. And don't discount the power of those images that you carry from your history. And they're players in the invisible chessboard of your life. And if you don't know more about the players on the board, you're not going to make some very smart choices. That's why sooner or later, psychopathology shows up and says, well, we're tired of putting up with this nonsense. We're just going to escalate our disfavor a little bit. And that's usually what brings people into therapy.
What's so interesting is you and I were both hit very hard by a depression that moved us to become therapists ourselves out of what we were doing. And if we listen to the message, we might not love the messenger, but the message is so essential. I'm thinking about so many things simultaneously. I'm fairly sure an interpretation of my dream. I used to live in Japan. I still dream in Japanese. I studied the language intensely. And yet my book, which I put 18 months into writing, is arriving at my home today. And I don't know exactly how to navigate it. What do I do with this thing with regard to marketing and going out and speaking about it? And how will people respond? Will I be loved, or will I get tomatoes thrown at me? We'll find out. But I think there's a vulnerability. I think that is a component. One of the things that delights me and frustrates me about dream interpretation is the multiplicity, the infinite nature of dreams, the fact that so many possible interpretations are available to us. My wife and I do it most mornings. I love Jung's style of interpretation. I love the Gestalt theory that all parts of the dream are reflections of ourselves.
That's the subjective level that I was talking about.
Right. And I was wondering if you were to give just a few tips on how to do it for the listener. How could a person begin to analyze their own dreams? Are there any basic tools, at least to get things started, perhaps before they go to somebody who's informed on various theories on dream interpretation?
Well, first of all, I knew nothing about your book or your experience in Japan. The moment you started talking about that, then you see that you began to realize your psyche is, within the last 24 hours, reached out and pulled in that history. It's saying it's like you're in a world which you don't know that well.
That's exactly right.
You're in a place of ambiguity. And it's quite possible there'll be sticks and stones. You never know. And you could see how your psyche is picking up on your apprehensions about this. They're more prevalent at this moment than your feeling of achievement in writing the book and having it published and so forth. What's dominant at this moment are the anxieties around it. And guess what? It shows up in the dream. Now, again, life would be easier if it just clanked out a telex and says, do this or do that. It doesn't work that way. But it now tells you what you're addressing. And I would go one step further and say, all right, if you understand the wisdom of that dream and that there's that center within you, at some level, it doesn't matter what happens out there. You did this book because it was right for you to do it. If it's not right for you to do it, don't do it, right? But something in you was wanting expression, something wishing to come through and find expression in the world through you. Now, what we did was not in any way a complete work on this dream, but it was preliminary enough. The key is to look at the associations. I knew nothing about your personal associations, so we were looking at collective association. What does a car mean? What does it mean to be in a foreign country? What does it mean to be assaulted by threatening forces? We all have examples of that in various ways out of our own unique biographies. Add that then to your personal experience at this moment. You say, well, I can see in my outer life, this is what is activating that field of apprehension within me. Maybe anxiety, but it's more about anticipation. What's going to happen? Will our hero get out of this okay? Or will they beat me up? Well, anytime you put a book out there, that's the way you're going to see it. And you just bring up an example that I've written about, and it's very sad for me. But my mother's life and father's life was a life basically of poverty and lack of education, given the time and place in which they were born. And the last conversation I had with my mother before she was dying, I had a book coming out in Swedish, and that had been her ancestry. And I told her that, just thinking she'd feel good about that. And she was mortified that I'd written a book. And she said, what are they saying? And I misheard that. I thought she was saying, well, what are the reviewers, if there are reviewers, saying? And I said, well, it just is coming out now and there are no reviewers. And then I realized that was the voice of childhood. That was her fear, because their defense was, don't go out there. You're going to get hammered. You'll get your heart broken out there. Don't go out there. And that's what their life had taught them. And that was the atmosphere they passed on to me. So writing a book was to step into that world of apprehension you're going through at this moment. But for her, it was enough to shut it down, you see. You pushed it through, but for her, it was terrible. And her apprehension was well-intended because she was worrying about her child, not knowing that maybe her child could handle that. That's why I say, no matter what anybody says, it was right for you. That's what you were serving.
100%. Adam Sandler has an album, one of his comedy albums is called They're All Going to Laugh at You. One of the exercises I actually have with my clients who do something that is really courageous is when they're feeling that kind of, oh my gosh, this anticipation, this fear, I have them look at the top TED Talks, the books that they think are unassailable, and read through the reviews. Most of them are glowing, and yet there are some haters. There will always be haters. And those voices sing in beautiful harmony with the voice of your mother's voice, who said, don't put yourself out there. They're going to throw tomatoes at you, essentially.
Sure. And I'm sad by that, because I realize even as she's dying, the fears of her history were dominant in her life. And I grieve that. I don't judge it. I grieve it. But I also know I can't be constrained by someone else's fears. And if nobody reads them, I've thought of myself always as a teacher. That's part of the mobile classroom out there. I'm doing what teachers do. That's why you and I are talking. This is what teachers do. So if that's my vocation, and vocation, by the way, is vocatus, to be called, not a job. I'm not paid for this. You're not paid for this. This is vocation. I'm a teacher. This is the classroom today. And you do what you're called to, and something inside you tells you this is right for you, ultimately, whether the world approves of it or not.
Such an important point. One of my most common themes, I work in Silicon Valley, where everyone did the right thing in order to get to where they are, only to find out that it was a half-baked, at most, proposition, that they were not happy with the outcome, and they don't know why, because they did everything they were supposed to do according to the blueprint. They had the appropriate hubris in the 20s that you described in Houston, so that they could have that rocket fuel to propel them to great heights. And lo and behold, they find that they've been sold something that's not awesome as they'd hoped. Certainly wouldn't cure it all. And one of the things that I love about, if you notice what you're doing here, and I'm sure you have noticed quite a bit, Jim, is that you look at the etymologies, you look at the meanings of words, and they become actual tools instead of just words that we throw around.
Yeah.
And that seems to be I think that's been one of your great contributions, has been to just notice this, that archetype is not a noun. I've always thought it was a noun, and that therapy is.
It is a noun in conventional language, but to really understand its dynamism, you need to see it as a verb, as a process.
So good.
Thereby, one is organizing the chaos of experience. Life itself has no meaning. The meaning comes from our engagement with it and the kind of symbolic structures and the personal meaning issues that we bring to the table. I mean, apart from survival, why are we here? In service to what? And what does your internal guidance system tell you about that? I mean, let's recognize most of history has been filled with people struggling just to survive the elements and other hostile circumstances. But at the same time, apart from those urgencies, there's always this deeper issue. Why am I here and in service to what? And if you don't ask that question consciously and over time, because the answer over time will change. When you're an infant, you're trying to learn how those arms are supposed to work. There are various tasks that come to us in terms of various stages of our lives. Part of the task of the first half of life is just go out there and do something. We see a lot of young people today just immobilized for all sorts of reasons. And part of that's the missing rites of passage. But just go out and do something and then try to figure out what's the next step. What do you do after that falls apart? That's when you start really growing up. But first comes stepping into the world. Then comes, and why am I in this world? And what matters to me in this? That's when you have to struggle with the question of meaning and purpose and wisdom.
Why am I here and in service to what? One of my favorite aphorisms of all time is that the quality of your questions determines the quality of your life. And we ask such bad questions so often. This is a very good question. I was wondering if we could circle back, though. Oh, and by the way, for those not familiar with archetypes, I'll first show you what an archetype is, and then I'm going to ask Jim if he'll tell us what it is, and then we'll get it back into a couple tips. But I remember the first time I saw Darth Vader on the screen. I was 9 years old. I saw Star Wars right when it came out. And no one needed to tell me that this was the scariest thing I'd ever seen in my life. They used various aspects of various cultures as something of a samurai helmet. They used the breathing of, I believe they used a scuba breathing apparatus to bring on that scary breath that he had. And he was all in black. He was tall, ominous, terrifying, imposing, the whole 9 yards, and immediately kills somebody. So what is an archetype?
Well, look, I mean, Darth Vader is Death the Invader. It's the ultimate defeat of the ego's fantasy of sovereignty in the world.
Wait, I just want you to say that again. I'm sorry.
It's the defeat of the ego's fantasy that it's the sovereign in the world.
That's amazing.
You know, if you're a child, there's a point there of what you'll call divine thinking. I'm the emperor of the universe. And then some bigger kid knocks you down and you say, well, not really. And life's a series of defeats. And by the way, Rilke said once, our task is to continuously be defeated by ever larger things. I love that sentence because
great one.
What's this defeat business? I want to win this, right? Well, go out and do what you think is going to win things, as we've talked about. That's why I said in my 30s, I'd achieved all my goals. That and $2 was buy a cup of coffee. It's like if you're being defeated by ever larger things, guess what? You're growing. You're developing. You're living an interesting life. I've often said to people in therapy, this is not about solving the life problems. This is about making your life more interesting. Every day you awaken to choices. Is fear going to dominate my life today, as it does without our even knowing it? Are you going to be seduced in some form of avoidance, of seduction, of staying asleep psychologically or spiritually? That's or an archetypal struggle. Right there, it's the struggle against the powers of darkness that are in the outer world, but they also are within our own souls. And to show up and face that and try to work it through in the best way you can was the hero's journey. Now, to label that as the hero's journey is just using language to talk about a process that's universal for all of us. So that's what an archetype is. It's a universal image that in some way is describing a process. And that's why I said it's properly understood as a verb.
And a dynamic entity unto itself. That's incredible. So let's say somebody's listening and they want to be able to take a first crack at identifying some of the meaning within their own dreams. What would you advise somebody who wants to just begin this process?
Well, look, at any time we make the necessary adaptations to life, we leave good parts of ourselves behind. So one of the things I've often tried to ask people to reflect upon, what were your dreams as a child? And not just talking about the childhood fantasies. I dreamt that I would play Major League Baseball. Well, the gods gave that body to somebody else, not to me. But I had my journey. I just didn't know it at that time. The fact that I had such an image meant you do have a journey. And this is a child's fantasy of that journey. Nothing wrong with that. But the key is to try to find that journey, because otherwise you're living somebody else's life. You see, you're here to live yours. That's why Jung's concept of individuation is not about becoming unique in the teenager sense, well, I'll wear my clothes or my hair differently. It's like becoming who you are. That's not narcissism. That's not selfish. It's the person that you will share with your children, with your partner, with your society. So you start with what your images are, what excites you, what interests you, what is it that you've always wanted to address, but didn't feel you had permission to accept. It not only is the issue of authority, can you find what is true for you amid that plethora of voices within you? Number one. And number two, do you have permission to have your own life? Most people don't. I don't think I did. I was doing all the right things. Permission comes when you seize hold of it. We realize I'm here a short time. And what am I to do with my life in that time? I'm to be here more than just a parent, more than just a taxpayer, more than a citizen. What am I to do? And that is find my way to address the mysteries of life. If someone thinks that's woo-woo, that's their ego defending themselves against the essential mystery that we swim in. As Jung said, are a short pause between two great mysteries. That's a pretty good definition of life. And the real question is, how are you going to live that short pause?
I've never heard that one. That is so good. We are a short pause between two mysteries. Well, I've got a final question for you, Jim. And I've been so grateful for you giving so much of your time. I've been looking so forward to this. And wow. If you were to consider the short pause between these two mysteries, what might be a skill or an insight that you believe would really help people as they go through life? And that, as you mentioned, it's not selfish. It might help other people. What might be that skill or insight that you think might be one of the most important insights or skills for humans to have?
Well, paradoxically, the question is important because we're mortal. Your ego may not like the idea, but it better deal with it in a more honest way and say, because life is short, then the choices I make do matter. And I have to decide where's the best place to put my energy in this short pause between the mysteries. I think you will find that by following your curiosity, your natural talents, your natural abilities. I don't mean that you have to become a Major League Baseball player or a violinist or whatever. You do what is unique within you. The dream I gave you before of the lady who had lived a perfect life until suddenly no one's there to reinforce that. Her assignment was to find her personal authority out from underneath the umbrella of well-meaning people who had always directed her life. So the first step is to recover that personal authority. The second step is to find the courage to start saying in arena after arena and arena of one's life, all right, now what is that authority now tell me to do here? Respectfully to the well-being of others, of course. But if I don't live what is true for me, then I'm, again, living someone else's life, or I'm living kind of half-life, caught up in timorous avoidance. of life. Once again, Jung put it this way in a letter. He said, the work of becoming the fuller human being consists of three parts, of which psychology can only help with the first, and that's to give us some insight. And by the way, that insight historically came from the tribal myths. That's why Jung said that therapy had to be invented in the 19th century. Strange language, but had to be invented because of the erosion of the tribal mythology around the world in the face of modern forces. And he said, psychology can only give insight. Then come the moral qualities of individuals. Second is courage. If you think life is difficult, think about the end of your life if it hasn't been yours, with all the screw-ups that we all have along the way. Then you'll really feel bad. You think that you feel bad now, you'll feel worse not having lived your life as guided by your best inner lights. So courage to face that, and endurance is the third thing. He said, living that out over time. It's not easy. Every day you have to show up. Fear and lethargy stand in the way.
I've heard you say, get up, stand up, show up. So I think that sounds about right. I'm going to say selfishly, Jim, I'm so glad you didn't become a baseball player. So thank you. I hope that this is a meaningful plan B for you.
Well, it is. I couldn't have imagined it, but what I call the gods are simply the personification of the mysterious forces of life, which I deeply respect. They had different plans than my ego had. And that's usually the way things work out. There's that old saying, man proposes and God disposes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Or as my grandpa would say, people plan and God laughs.
There you go.
Oh, Jim, thank you, my man. I loved being with you.
A privilege to be with you, Adam. Thank you. And good conversation, and I really wish you well.
Okay, thank you. I will take that blessing.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to SuperPsyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.